Hello, this is Faith at Faith and Books. I am at 75% of the rise and fall of the Third Reich, according to my Kindle, or the Kindle app. And so, and we've gotten to the point where Pearl Harbor has happened and Hitler has declared war and on the USA, and he's about to give a speech to the Reichstag to explain to the Germans why he's done this. So I thought I'd just do a quick recap. A lot has happened in this quarter of the book. It goes at a much faster pace, I think, because for parts of it, the author wasn't actually there. For a lot of the earlier stuff, well, not the part where it's about Hitler growing up and that sort of thing, but the whole buildup of the Nazi Party and the takeover and the beginnings of the war. The author, William Shire, was actually a reporter in Berlin. So he saw a lot of this, going on. And he just goes really deep into all the diplomatic stuff that went on. But like when he's talking about the invasion of Russia, he wasn't there. And so he's kind of uneven because you'll get pages and pages and pages of stuff going on diplomatically between all these different actors and telegram cables they've sent and letters and diaries and meetings, and then Russia is just like a chapter or something. So it's a little bit uneven. But this part was really interesting to me because I kind of knew up to Poland, and then I had some sort of holes in my understanding of how things proceeded from there. So I think I left you last where it was 4:30 a.m. They were going into Poland, and they did. They went into Poland. Poor Poland. I would have liked to have learned more about what went on the ground in Poland, like what the Poles actually suffered. He doesn't really go that much into detail about that. What he does focus on is because people were still attempting to stop it because they really didn't want World War II to start, and they knew that Poland was going to be a trigger. So Mussolini and all these different players were still trying to get Hitler to stop, even after he had gone in. So he goes in, he smashes poor Poland, he's victorious. He and Stalin have cut this terrible deal where they're going to divide Poland up, and Stalin starts to manipulate things, though. He's actually better at this kind of negotiating than Hitler is. So he sort of outsmarts Hitler, and he takes the Baltic states, including Lithuania, which really upsets Hitler because Lithuania had a lot of Germans in it. Anyway, so then Hitler he's kind of waiting for the reaction that's going to come from the Allies. And he's hoping that it's going to be this sham war, that Britain and France aren't really going to respond. And at first it seemed like that. They weren't really responding. There was some activity going on in the ocean with the navies. So occasionally, a German U-boat would shoot at a British freighter or something like that. There were some of those kind of incidents, but not very much. And so, but when is it that Chamberlain's government falls and Churchill? Is it right? Is it when Poland gets invaded, or is it later with? Well, anyway, all these things are happening just months apart. So Hitler decides he's gonna next move on to Belgium and the Netherlands. And he starts planning for that. But then his Navy actually planned the invasion of Norway, and they sort of brought it to his attention that they needed to protect the shipping lanes from Sweden, because and Hitler was always very concerned about the resources he needed for Germany, and they got their iron ore, which they needed a lot of because they were building up the military, from Sweden. Sweden was neutral. And they shipped the iron ore down the coast of Norway, past Denmark and into Germany. And they were getting nervous about that because the British were up there patrolling, and also I think this is when the Russians attacked Finland. So the British wanted to help the Finns, so they were going to send troops to Finland, and so that meant that there was going to be more British up there by Norway, and they were really nervous about getting their iron ore. So they decided that the Admiralty came up with this plan to attack Norway, and Hitler approved it. So they switched gears, and instead of going into Belgium and the Netherlands, they attacked Norway. Now, I had forgotten that Norway was taken over by the Nazis. I'd forgotten this aspect. So I found this part really interesting. And they did it pretty quickly, but the Danes gave in right away. The king capitulated right away. They didn't have any defense. They weren't strong enough. There was nothing they could do, really. But the Norwegians were kind of scrappier, and they refused. And there were some battles, and the king and the government escaped. And they escaped twice. They ran from Oslo to another city, and then when that city started getting bombed, they ran out I think they were above the Arctic Circle at some little village. And then somehow they found out about where they were, and so the Luftwaffe came in and bombed the village to smithereens, thinking, they even reported back that they had killed the king and the government, but they had run out into the woods. And there's just this image of the king and the government standing out in the woods with their, up to their knees in snow, watching this village get obliterated by these bombs. But the British somehow got them out. So, and the Danes, because they were so compliant, initially the Nazis kind of rewarded them. They didn't even deport their 7,000 Jews or whatever, and they left them alone. But then later, apparently, they got harsher, and then the Danes started a resistance movement. But the Norwegians were resisting right away. So that was a big ego booster for Hitler. So then he decides to turn his attention back to. Oh, and I remember what had also distracted him or made him reluctant to go into Belgium and the Netherlands before he attacked Norway, and that was a German plane had to do an emergency landing in Belgium, and the Nazi officer, whatever his name was, had plans to invade Belgium, and they found them. He tried to burn them, but they found them. The Belgians found them, and so that made Hitler kind of back off and deny everything. And so he was going to wait several months before he tried again to sort of, because they were on the alert. But even with so many warnings, even with that happening and all these other things that were going on, they still didn't really prepare for invasion. It was just so weird that just kept happening, country after country. And it seemed so strange to me that Germany, which is the one that had been defeated so horribly in World War I, was willing to go in and fight. And all these other countries that had won were absolutely dreading war and didn't want to go to war, and they were just blind. They wanted so much to avoid war, they didn't even see what was right in front of them, what they should have seen. Really strange. But anyway, so then I guess it's May of, is it 41 or 40? I'm forgetting I think it's 40, yeah. So they do go in to Belgium and the Netherlands, and they take over those countries in a matter of days. And they even go in. This is when they do the great, or not great, but the tricky thing where they send the tanks in through the Ardennes woods, because all of their defenses are set up where the Germans attack them in World War I, and so they outsmarted them by coming in a different way. And so they swung around and trapped them, and they pushed them. They were surrounded on three sides, the Anglo, French, Belgian, and they pushed them towards the Channel. And this is when Dunkirk happens. And I think that's maybe that's when Chamberlain's government fell and Churchill became prime minister. I'm trying to remember. Anyway, if you know, let me know, or I can go look it up after this. But anyway, so there was the miracle of Dunkirk, which probably wasn't that much of a miracle, although it was really good for the Allies that they were able to get so many people out. But Hitler didn't want, he had fought in that area, and he was afraid that his tanks would get bogged down in the swampy sand earth. Goring was so in love with his Luftwaffe that he said, "Oh, you don't need the tanks. Let me just send the Luftwaffe, and then the infantry can catch up." So that's why he halted the tanks in for 3 days while they were waiting for the infantry. The English and everybody was able to boat lift all the retreating troops, or most of them. Not all of them made it out, but most of them did. So after that, what happened after that? Oh, so then Hitler decides he's going to do a land invasion of Britain, and he still has this great confidence in the power of the Luftwaffe. So they decide what they're going to do is it's really hard to land all the soldiers that they need. So they're going to use the German Navy and the Luftwaffe on England, soften it up so that then they can get the troops in. So this is when London undergoes like the 57 days of bombing or something horrible like that. And it's really bleak for the British. But what was really going on, even though it was horrible, all the bombing and everything, the Germans were actually losing more planes at first. Just when the percentages started to move in the German favor, that's when they sort of lost their firmness or whatever, and that's when they decided that they couldn't do this anymore. They were losing a lot more planes than the British were, because the British had really good anti-aircraft defenses. And even though they were bombing the arsenals and everything, as fast as they were bombing them, the British were putting up more. So they actually increased armament and arsenals during that period. So that was pretty neat. Anyway, so the Germans finally realized that it wasn't going to work. They didn't have the sea power. Just bombing London wasn't going to do enough. And then, of course, the British started bombing Berlin in retaliation. So very reluctantly, Hitler had to concede that he wasn't going to be able to get the British then. But while this was going on, tensions were brewing with Stalin, because Stalin kept doing these sneaky things, even though diplomatically he was trying to be all nice and everything. But Hitler had stopped. He never really trusted him, but he was just going to use him so he could get to Poland. So he starts deciding, he starts getting really nervous about the oil fields in Romania, because Stalin makes this land grab that's a little too close to the Romanian oil fields. And like I said, Hitler was really nervous about his resources, and that's where he was getting oil from, and he didn't want anyone interfering with that. So then he decided he had to go take Romania. So he just moves in, he doesn't tell anybody, and he goes into Romania, and then he goes next step further, and he goes into Yugoslavia and takes over Yugoslavia, which they fought a little bit. And then the government came to Berlin to sign a peace treaty and sort of make, Hitler their overlord. But when the government went back, there was a coup, and Hitler got really mad about that. And so he had been planning to invade Russia. He's starting to go crazy now, because he was going to invade Russia like in October of 1940. And they said, no, you can't do that. You can't invade Russia right in the fall like that. So you have to wait. So he said, okay, we'll wait till May. But then in May, the thing with Yugoslavia happened, where they had the coup. And so he decided he took it really personally, and so he decided he had to go in and crush Yugoslavia. Well, they fought. they fought back. And so it took a few weeks longer to conquer them. And they also went in and got Greece. Oh, that was the other thing that was going on. The Admiralty kept telling Hitler, you've got to, you really have to, we have to get the British in some other way. Since we can't do a land invasion of Britain itself, we need to go for her colonies, her empire. And they wanted to cut off her British access to the Mediterranean, so they wanted to take over Gibraltar. They couldn't get Franco or Mussolini to cooperate properly. But what wound up happening is, since Hitler went into Yugoslavia, Mussolini was trying to take over Greece. He just went down and took it that way, so that side of the Mediterranean. Also, I think he had made a deal with Iraq. So this was the worst time for Churchill. He was really scared that if they couldn't get the resources to Britain from their colonies, they were just sunk. And so he writes a letter to Roosevelt just begging him to come into the war. And I think that's when the land lease happened. Anyway, so then they go into Russia, and at first everything's going really well, but since they're a month late, they're just not prepared for how scrappy the Russians are, and they just keep bringing more and more reserves, more and more, fresh troops in that the Germans don't have. And it's getting later and later in the year. They just can't they get all the way to like 20 or 30 miles from Moscow, and they just can't get any further because now it's late in the season and it's raining and there's too much mud. And it's so weird that Hitler was worried about the mud in Belgium where he had fought, but he couldn't imagine that would be a problem in Russia. And he's controlling everything from afar, so he doesn't really understand what's going on. And he keeps telling them that they have to be ruthless and that they shouldn't obey any protocol, that they should just, the plan is to just starve and kill all the Russians. So it really seems like Hitler's losing it. And he tells them they have to stand fast, and you can't retreat, and they have to retreat or they're going to be wiped out. They don't have winter clothing. It starts after the rains. The temperatures drop to below zero. The troops are it's just this horrible nightmare, and he's just not winning. It's just not going to happen the way he wants it to. And then in the meantime, he's been negotiating with Japan. He's hoping Japan will come in. First, he's hoping Japan will come in and attack Russia at Vladivostok. But then he decides, no, what Japan needs to do is go attack Singapore or some other British colony and put pressure on Britain. And if that kind of thing happens, then that'll keep the Americans won't want to get involved for some reason. Anyway, there's lots of complicating, I have to go in a minute, there's lots of complicating things going on, and then the Japanese surprise everybody by bombing Pearl Harbor. So that's where I am now. They had just signed agreements that they would, Germany would declare war on the USA if the USA declared war on Japan. And so that's what Hitler did. And he's about to go into the Reichstag and give a speech, for the benefit, really not of the Germans, because the Germans are completely crushed under his heel now. But he controls absolutely everything. But he, mostly for the radio broadcast so that, Churchill and everybody can hear him. So that's where I am so far. This section was really exciting. I thought it was interesting because I really didn't know. I only had very vague impressions of what went on. So it was really informative. And I feel like the writing pace maybe picked up a bit. Anyway, talk to you later. Bye.